I was watching the opening ceremony for the Olympics a couple of weeks ago, as we all were. And then the other night, it occurred to me to watch our opening ceremony, the 2012.
The 2012.
And I had a peculiar reaction to it. And I messaged you to say,
yeah.
And you said, well, funnily enough, you'd watched it as well. And
I had.
And it equally had made you very sad watching it.
Shall we have a quick blast of it?
Let's have a quick blast to remind folks what we're talking about.
The memories.
I mean,
every time there's an Olympics, like we're approaching the end of the Paris Games, which I think seem to have been a success, you know.
Yeah.
But I do think perennially of 2012 as a great
high
moment in
watermark,
my
wasn't it?
life.
Yeah.
You know,
I mean, I sat there, and from the moment of Daniel Craig as James Bond marching into the Queen's office, the Queen turning around, and the whole world
Mr. Bond.
going, "Oh my God, it is the
It's
Queen!"
her.
And then the helicopter ride. I mean, the helicopter ride through London.
yes.
I mean, London never fails to amaze, does it? It doesn't matter how long you've lived here. Whenever you get one of those flights that tracks over
stunning city.
the city, and you look at it and you think, my God, what a place. Anyway, so they did that amazingly. Tower Bridge with the Olympic rings, helicopter buzzing through Tower Bridge, and then over Canary Wharf, and then into Stratford, and then Bond looking like he's about to jump out of the plane. But the Queen pushing past him, and this lady in pink parachuting out of the thing, only moments later to emerge into the VIP
It's very
thing
clever.
to hear God Save the Queen. I mean, and everybody just stood on their feet applauding her.
It was.
They were applauding Britain, weren't they?
Yes, they were. I mean, there's so much I could say about it. One is that there were two people really who were responsible for putting the Olympics together. One is Sebastian Coe, and the other was my great friend Tessa Jowell, sadly no longer with us. And I played a teeny weeny tiny part in it.
Did you?
Yes, because Tessa asked, with whom I sat on the Millennium Commission, asked me to write her a memo on why we should bid for London.
Wow,
to give to Blair. Now I don't know if it helped, but anyway, I did.
Mate, I'm going to pause the conversation here and say, you brought the Olympics
I
to
really
London.
didn't. I think David Beckham and Tessa Jowell, and in fact Blair himself in Singapore was
Yeah.
But it's more the sort of personal dimension, which is that she'd been plotting this for a long time, and had really, because New Labour had been so burnt by the Dome.
Yes.
The initial reaction was, "You've got to be kidding."
Yes.
This is going to be a Dome times 100, and for nothing. But Tessa and Seb Coe and David Beckham and a whole bunch of amazing people just really, and it made it work. It was a joyous moment.
Because we should also fix it back in time, and this was just as the financial collapse around the world was about to take hold.
It was
wasn't
on 2005 was when it happened. The day, and we got the bid. We were successful bid the day before 7/7.
Right.
So it was a bittersweet moment in British history.
Yeah.
But returning to what you were saying about the actual opening ceremony and why that strikes such a chord with people of our generation, I think, is that there was I felt that it had. Danny Boyle choreographed it.
Yeah.
It had irony and confidence, which are my two favourite things in a nation, right? It was modern, but it was comfortable with its tradition. It took the piss out of itself.
Yeah.
It was about prosperity, but also about decency. You had the NHS, the Beveridge report in there. You had the Sex Pistols in there.
Yeah.
You know, everything was in there.
It was ebullient, wasn't it?
It was
full of confidence.
Stuffed full of...
And the reason, and we should just make the point, the reason we both watched it with, I was tearing up watching it because through sadness, because I thought this is an unrecognisable country.
Let's go back to 2012.
Yeah.
It's like it's the high. It seems to be, and God, talk about how deluded I was. It seemed that we'd reached the high season of the centre ground, which was that we'd had 13 years of New Labour, and now we had a Conservative Liberal coalition, right?
Yeah.
What could possibly go wrong, right?
Yeah.
On the other side of the Atlantic, we had Obama against Romney, who now seems like
the most moderate,
mild-mannered,
exactly,
you know. And there was a clip the other day of them debating, and when Obama and Romney faced off in the first debate, they gave each other a hug.
Yeah.
A hug.
Yeah.
Right?
They would laugh at each other's jokes.
They were just joking, and, you know.
Yeah.
It was a very different mood. It was a great warning to me against complacency.
Yeah.
Because obviously what happened afterwards.
How quickly things can go wrong. Yeah.
And I suppose, I mean, there are lots and lots of things about that moment which, when you look back with hindsight, you can see that the seeds of what was to come were there. I mean, one is that I went with my kids and my dad, who's still alive, to quite a few of the events, and one of the things we went to, because I used to do it a lot, was judo. And I remember sitting in the judo arena and watching Putin, who's a judo black belt, being ushered in, so he could watch
I remember,
you know, and
amazing.
And at that point,
Yeah.
this was still 2 years before the annexation of Crimea.
Yeah.
We were still sort of just about on the same side.
Yeah.
And now you think, you know,
my God,
how deluded we were.
He was in our midst.
He was in our midst, you know.
Yeah.
And then who was actually the ringmaster of the games? It was bloody Boris.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely no doubt that he used the games as a springboard for the next phase of his political ambition.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, what I find very interesting in the context of today is not only that you look at that nation celebrating itself with sheer joy and confidence, and you think, would it even be possible for us to do that? Because you couldn't do it with sincerity today.
I don't think so. And I think, you know, again, we felt confident, but we were also in the midst of austerity. It was the year of the omnishambles budget.
That's right.
Remember that? The pasty tax?
That's right. Well, I remember the row about the cost of the opening ceremony.
Well, of course.
I think it was something like 40 or 50 million quid. Because there's I'd listened to this ages ago. There's a brilliant, the Reunion, Radio 4 show, gets them all back together to talk about it. And they're talking about how it was obvious that the scale of the ambition, although Britain had set out to do an affordable games and an affordable opening ceremony, they still needed more money to do enact this great vision. And all of the contingency, because we were in the middle of austerity, all of the contingency had been scooped up and taken away for something else. And they had to sort of go to the government to beg for more money to do this. And there was a great row about it. I remember a Question Time being featured on that Reunion episode where there was somebody, I can't remember who it was, but a politician was saying she thought it was an absolute outrage that this money was being spent.
A lot of people did say that. Yeah.
And Rosie Millard, the arts editor of the BBC, put in this great defence saying that, you know, there should be money for national joy. There should be, you know, in years to come, people, if we get this right, people will look at this as a great advert for a confident nation, which of course it was.
The culture budget has been stripped bare.
Absolutely
and, you know,
nothing in the cupboard at all.
Closing and, you know.
But that sense of, I mean, it was actually very courageous, both of Brown and then latterly of Cameron, to say, the hell with it, we are going to do this properly.
Yeah.
And that triggered something with me a little bit about Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves, where you've used the term to me, the risk of them becoming technocratic managers, you know.
I hope not, but it is,
you know, is that all they're going to do? Just manage stuff? Where obviously you don't get an Olympics every Parliament, but we've got to find the proof of the pudding is that investment was definitely worth it.
Yes.
And that sense, that aspiration for
cheap as chips, really.
Absolutely, for something joyful for the nation was very important for us all. And it does, maybe the paradox of what I've just said is that, you know, only 4 years later, we marched into Brexit.
Well, there were lots of, again, the seeds were there.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the seeds that I think, the more I think about it, the more I think this was the great missed opportunity, was that the Lisbon Treaty, EU treaty, there wasn't a referendum. And the first stirrings of let's have a Brexit referendum were on the back of not having a referendum on Lisbon.
Yeah.
And if Brown or Cameron had a referendum, because Blair had promised in 2004 that there would be a referendum on the EU constitutional treaty, of which Lisbon was basically just a copy.
Yeah.
let's say there'd been that referendum, and let's say the Brits had voted against it. So what?
Yeah.
You know, many countries vote against treaties and then they amend it, and we'd still be in the EU today. That's my point.
Yeah,
You know, but the refusal to have a referendum on Lisbon set the path for UKIP, and what UKIP did brilliantly, and eventually Vote Leave was able to exploit, was to knit together the pain of austerity with this feeling of not being consulted.
That's
and
right.
all that was there. And then another thing that had just happened, and I remember at the time that the Olympics being seen as sort of the answer to was the riots of 2011, which had been a baffling event for Cameron and co. Which was and indeed most people.
What was it all about?
What's it all about?
Yeah.
And that was a sort of taste of this undirected but real rage to come.
It's very interesting. I hadn't thought about it in those terms.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right. And it's very interesting as you look back through history about populist movements and how they capitalize on a characteristic, a national sentiment, but then it's always strapped into a very temporal event. There's something that they latch onto as a trigger, but it sort of invokes a sort of underlying national resentment or an ambition or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But that's what sparks it into life, and suddenly you get this explosion.
I mean, I look back at that time and I was too dismissive of UKIP because I disagreed with them so strongly. Yeah. I didn't. First of all, I underestimated Farage as quite how determined and wicked he was, and I also didn't believe at that point that such a substantial part of the senior Conservative ranks. I knew that the membership would be Brexity, as we didn't call it then, but I hadn't realised quite how that people like Michael Gove and Boris Johnson would come out against the membership.
Yes.
They were making Eurosceptic noises, and it was a Eurosceptic party.
Yeah.
But Euroscepticism at that point did not mean leaving the EU.
The EU, yeah.
And all this was bubbling away. And I think that at some point in all of that, we lost our nerve as a country, and we started to accentuate the negative. There was this great upsurge of excitement in 2012, but in a way now I look at that as the end of something rather than the beginning of
that's
something.
Right. Well, that's what's so peculiar about it.
It was sort of the best part of the 80s. The 80s, incredibly painful decade, but there was a sort of flamboyance and liberation about it in certain parts of the economy, let's say. And then the 90s were a very sort of exciting decade, and then you get to 2012. And to your original point, you felt we've landed the plane. This is a good place to live. Yeah. And
we didn't realise we'd landed it into
a wall. Shame on me for thinking that, because I just I now look back on it and think, how could one be so deluded? And it is because you can't always predict what's going to happen next, if ever. Yeah. But I mean, you think of what then happened and how history speeded up. It was Brexit, it was Trump, then it was COVID, then it was the aftermath of COVID, and then it was Ukraine, and now it's Gaza. There was just this. There have just been the perma crisis, as it were, has taken the place of that.
Yeah. Right. Well, let's pause there.
Let's pause
and have a very brief break, and then we're going to come back and think about how things might turn around. Okay. So how does a nation, I don't want to belittle any sort of mental health jargon, but I think we are a nation suffering from a sort of chronic depression and
PTSD, I think.
And a bit of shock syndrome, yeah.
Yes.
And how does one emerge from that? What can government do? What can the media do to try to kickstart a renewal?
I think part of, we talked about this. I think last week or whenever it was, about Kamala Harris's "We're not going back."
Yeah,
and I've been thinking a lot about that and why it made me want to stand up and cheer in in sort of 2012 fashion. And I think that part of it is that, and she's really the first Western politician to talk in those terms, which is that we've been through, the world has been through, and the West has been through a series of, blunt force trauma events.
Yeah, yeah.
And when that's happened, there are really two things you can do. One is to respond technocratically and say, right, we'll move that there, and we'll take winter fuel allowance down there, and we'll move this from here to there, and we'll cancel the Stonehenge tunnel, and
bit of decorating. Yeah.
Or you can have an honest conversation which goes like, that was really horrible, wasn't it?
Yeah.
We need a new start, and we need to, and the first part of a new start, and this is where Reeves and Starmer might turn out to be on the right path, is to be honest about where we are.
Yeah.
And say, actually, we can't afford this now. But the other foot has to drop, which is to say, and we're going to do this because we believe in this is a great country, and we can do great things, and side whisper, a bit more collaboration with Europe wouldn't go astray, and we believe in NATO, and we believe in the UN, and we believe in the World Health Organization, and we are a multilateral, pluralist country, right?
Yeah. But aren't you bored of sentiments being expressed?
Yes, I am. I am.
And isn't it now time for
well, you see, Starmer,
a project?
If he was sitting here, would say that's exactly his point, and that he's a do not talk thing. The problem is that, and I think this is perhaps the biggest missing thing in his toolkit, is that he's not Director of Public Prosecutions. When you are Prime Minister, you have to have a narrative. You have to be a teacher politician. You have to explain, and this is where Blair and Thatcher were so remarkable, which is that they, whatever you thought of the message, they were constantly saying, this is what I'm doing and why.
Yeah.
And no one doubts what those two were about. And I think if Gordon Brown had a slightly different circumstances, absent the collapse in the world economy, he could have risen to that as well. There was greatness there. There is greatness there.
Yeah.
But as you say, politics has become about expressing feelings and sentiments, and not all of them particularly pleasant. And I think that it reached its nadir in the kind of stop the boats Rwanda insanity, really. There's no other word that descended upon the Tory party in its last years of government. And the problem with populism is it pretends that there are simple solutions to complex problems.
Yeah.
And I would like there to be leadership which admitted that, there aren't, and challenge people. I think people like to be challenged. I think voters and the public and all of us like to feel that we're participating in as you say, in a project.
Yeah. That the thing, I mean, it's totally unrelated, except to say that it involves a number of things that Britain is currently wrestling with. One is housing, one is the climate, one is building new towns. That project in Saudi Arabia, what do they call it? The Line.
Oh yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Now I know that's got it's complicated beyond belief, and they've scaled back their ambitions for it. But there is something, and obviously it goes without saying, I hope that Saudi Arabia, repellent, bloody authoritarian state, vile in so many ways. However, this as a project, developing this 100 kilometers or whatever it was of a new way of living, and very sort of Corbusian in its kind of scope and ambition. It'd be great to do something like, not like that specifically, but to say we're going to have a new city somewhere. We're going to have a new town. It'll be here. Everyone's talked about new towns for decades now, and the last one we've had was Milton bloody Keynes. It's like, let's have a new Milton Keynes somewhere and make that a source of national focus, where here's a new way of living. Here's put all those bloody multicultural naysayers in their box and say, this is how Britain can express itself and live as a community. That would be something great. That would tick a lot of boxes.
I think it would. But I think part of that is you have to be ready to seize the reins and take a few hits.
Yeah, for sure.
Because I'm obviously in favour of devolution and decentralisation, but I sometimes think that is now a euphemism for passing the buck down the line.
Yeah.
So what happens is, there's a proposal like that, which is backed by Number 10, the Treasury, the Cabinet Office, and it sort of gets lost.
Yeah.
In it down the chain of command. And I think that what I'd love to see from Starmer, to be honest, is some big hits.
Yeah.
You know, and actually saying, well, I don't care if you don't like it.
For sure.
This is what we're doing.
For sure.
You know,
And it's going to be exciting and different and new. And, you know, there are going to be people who hate it. There are going to be people who question it. But this is what we're going to do. And this is why, strategically, this thing ticks a lot of boxes. And here's a new way of doing it. Now, they've done that in all sorts of places. You know, Mitterrand, right, was famous for his grand projet. You know, it's like, let's go out and and bizarrely enough, the closest we've ever had to that in ambition. Well, I was going to say Boris Johnson, actually. But, you know, unrealised. But at least Johnson had a sense of what big thinking could do. As I'm talking about as Mayor of London.
Yes.
You know, which is where he should have bloody well stopped.
Stopped.
But, you know, this sense of the grandiose. Now, this ties back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the show, which was this grand opening ceremony. Wasn't the most expensive opening ceremony of all time. In fact, one of the cheapest. But my God, it was grand in ambition and creativity. And that's what I'm reaching for, is not Angela Rayner saying we're just going to tell councils to build 10% more houses, or we're going to build a few new towns over here. I'm looking for something. Oh my God! Wow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with political pageantry, and I think that when politics is capable of sort of presenting that kind of confident leadership, it sings. The problem is that it's more like entertainment than pageantry at the moment.
Yeah.
Which is that politics has become about the cheap hit. You know, the soundbite, not even the soundbite, the tweet. You know, you hear people around Westminster talking about the Twitter cycle. My God, you know,
it's like one
Mayfly
show politics.
Well, it is absolutely.
It is. It's like and next.
You know, basically, this is season 1 of renewed Labour, right? And we don't know if it's going to be renewed.
That's right.
Will there be a season 2? You know, we've got past the pilot, just about.
And as we've said, you know, they are. It's never going to get better than now.
No, I mean that is the clear and present danger. Is that Starmer's natural aversion to risk and his caution and his desire to hold together whatever coalition he's assembled will make him miss the moment.
I think people are absolutely thirsty for something to get excited about.
So much. I mean, it's amazing to me that we exist in a world now where it's treated as really, really good news that the BBC's licence fee is going to be kept.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the BBC is not without its flaws, okay? But the idea that it was ever an issue.
I know.
That, you know, this is like the NHS, one of the great things about one of the great legacies of 20th century Britain is that we have, you know, still the best broadcasting service in the world. And yet there are a number of people in quite significant positions in the pundit class and in politics who think, oh, no, you know, it's time has passed. You know, don't be so ridiculous. And I'm, you know, devastated to watch culture in this country at every level being hollowed out for peanuts money.
Yes.
Peanuts money.
Yes.
You know, Lisa Nandy, good choice as culture secretary, actually, because she's got vim, you know, and I'm just hoping that her relationship with Rachel Reeves is good enough for her to go into the Treasury and say, you know what, we need a few more billion, because that can, a few billion in the culture world.
Imagine the impact.
Can have, and I'm not just talking about the Royal Opera House here, I'm talking about, you know, theatre groups in small towns and places, and travelling mobile
Rep
dance reps and things,
and
you know, anything. You know, it's like the COVID plus austerity has torn the heart out of
playing fields,
you know, everything,
grassroots sport and cricket,
and there's
football.
No doubt the return on cultural investment is phenomenal. It's hard to measure.
We should, do you know what we should have is like, and I think they've got one in like Bhutan.
Right.
They've got basically a minister for national joy.
Yes.
And it's that's what we need, somebody who is going to say people will love this.
Well, do you remember when the Department of National Heritage, as it was originally called, everyone called it the Ministry of Fun.
Right.
And DCMS has sort of expanded to include digital, and it's become
Orwellian.
Well, it's just another place where slightly miserable decisions are taken, you know. And I'm actually, it's funny you say it, because when Tessa Jowell was culture secretary, it was all about where is the joy? You know, what are we doing?
Yeah.
We've got all this good stuff we've done as a government, but is it speaking to people?
Yeah.
Is it speaking to people's hearts? And there hasn't been, in my view, I'm biased, but there hasn't been a politician like her since, I think,
Right.
who's willing to step up to the plate and say, let's do this.
I didn't know you were
good friends, yeah.
Yeah, how did you?
Because I was on a body which I don't think exists anymore, called the Millennium Commission, which was the amongst the.
How did you get drafted onto that?
I was approached and then went through a sort of vetting and appointment system. I served on it for a while, and she was whoever was culture secretary.
Yeah.
Was ex officio the chair of the Millennium, so that's how I got to know her.
Good.
And Heseltine was on it. And it was very interesting because there was still a bit of money to hand out, but then there was the huge issue of what to do with the dome. Now everyone now thinks of the dome in as much as they think about it as the O2 Arena, which is a storming success. But I can tell you that it was not.
It's very funny.
It was very, very difficult to sell.
Do you know what's hilarious is when people occasionally put on Twitter or Instagram or whatever pictures of the dome before it got turned into the O2 Arena, and people are going, "Have you seen the crazy shit they had in that thing?"
It was unbelievable, and I arrived after 2000, and the central issue was how do we get rid? What's the future of this?
Yeah.
And in a way. I remember Heseltine sort of saying it's obvious. It's got to be a venue of some kind, but it's not straightforward. And it was just a tent.
Do you know what? When I was at the Daily Mirror in the year 2000, and I said to the management, what we need to do is get one of those laser projectors. You know, the kind of thing that they put Gale Porter's.
Yes, yeah.
And because the Mirror was on the 22nd floor of Canary Wharf Tower,
right, yes,
which at that time had no buildings around it. So you had this direct
I was on the 14th
shot.
floor in those days.
So you had this direct view of the Millennium Dome.
Yeah,
and of course,
absolutely.
the entire planet's cameras were
Yeah.
looking at the dome.
Yeah.
And I wanted on the stroke of midnight to project read Thursday's Daily Mirror
that
for all
would
the
have been so glorious.
and I was talked out of it, but
that would have been the most fun thing that happened at the Dome on its watch as the Dome.
Can you imagine the tolling of the new millennium?
Oh my God!
The first thing that appeared was a big advert for the Daily Mirror.
It was a disaster, but it's ended up now as a I go there quite a lot.
The development around there is fantastic.
No, it's very good.
I mean, it's still a little bit kind of windy.
It is a bit windy. Yeah,
it could do with a bit more
slightly
density.
like Brasilia, right?
It is a bit like Brasilia.
Yeah. But I mean, my God, from a start. I mean, it shows you never can tell, because if you'd said in 2020, if you said in the year 2000 that by 2024 it would be a thriving restaurant and high-end shopping mall with a big arena,
mad.
I'd have thought it was absolutely.
Right. Well, anyway, thank you for that. I enjoyed that conversation. It's good to take a slightly offbeat look at things.
Absolutely, and also, I mean, the spirit of 2012 may be in abeyance, but I don't think it's dead.
No, we will drag it out of its sickbed and pump it full of steroids
and get it back to Mr. Universe.
Right, folks. Hope you enjoyed
on that slightly unhinged note.
Some housekeeping. There is no Sunday Q&A session this week. Why is that, Matt?
Well, it's the height of summer.
And we're on holiday.
And we are recharging our batteries.
We're both going to Bournemouth for...
Yes,
we're sharing single beds in a guest house on the beachfront.
I shall be sleeping in a bivouac in front of the Dome in celebration.
Anyway, you can definitely get your questions in for when we come back shortly. Please send in any questions to 2matts@tnepublishing.com. That's the number 2, MATTS, @tnepublishing.com. And we've got an amazing interview for you next Friday with a guy who will inspire opinions left, right and centre, I'm
Certainly
sure.
Will.
But we enjoyed it very much. I'm not going to tell you who it is right now.
No, it's a mystery guest.
It's a really good one. Don't forget our subscription offer. If you like this podcast, you'll love The New European. Seriously, I'm not just saying that. I'm depending on you doing this. Go to theneweuropean.co.uk/2matts. That's the number 2, MATTS, and there's a link in the show notes. Thanks to producer Matt Hill at Rethink Audio, as ever. And until next Friday...
It's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from him.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.